All right, welcome everyone. We're doing another hallway hangout about WordPress 5.9. I already have a lovely group of folks gathered here. This is just a casual spot where we can sit and chat about all things 5.9. So if you have questions about the release, bugs that you're worried about, you're writing a post and you want feedback on it, you're on a contributor team and you're stuck talking about something, whatever it is, this is kind of the next 45 minutes or so. That's what this is for. If we are not going to cover everything, we never do. I feel like these could go on 24/7 and we would never cover everything. So feel free to follow up in the FSE Outreach Experiment Slack channel and make Slack. We can keep discussing things there. And I always welcome DMs as well, but public discussion is always helpful because I'm sure you're not the only one with the questions. Before we started recording, Rita brought up some great questions around and Meg brought up some great questions around page builders and how we think about that with 5.9 and what role they play. And this is something that I'll chime in real quick and then we can kind of jump into open discussion. But this is something I've seen a lot of where it's like, oh, our page builder is dead. Do I need to use a page builder more? And I think one of the cool things about 5.9 is that it really sets a foundation that page builders actually can build upon. And so when you're thinking about WordPress core, it's not meant to cover all the use cases. It's not meant to have a really refined, opinionated experience. It's meant to be open-ended. And I think Anna Morris was sharing a lot of awesome feedback this past week. And that was one of the things that came up when Anna was sharing today was like, there's so many ways to do the same thing. And it's like, yes, that's intended. That's the point. That's WordPress. It's open-ended for you to figure out. But that doesn't mean refinement doesn't need to happen so that people know what's going on. I think the same thing is true with page builders. It's replicating some functionality, but it's not going to replicate all. And the intent is that there can be a shared foundation where you're not locked in to one or the other, and instead can switch between more readily. So, but I'd be curious to hear other people's thoughts there, and also the language piece. Like Meg brought up really good points around the language matters, and I think language is shifting. Like thinking about like editing site page builders, even the idea of themes with block themes is shifting. So there's a lot of both current language that needs to be, the idea of it needs to be updated, and new language that's coming about as a result of new concepts that full siting unlocks. So it's a lot of fun words when language fails us. Yeah, does anyone have any thoughts? Yeah, Nick, maybe?
Yeah, I've been very entrenched in this, and so when I think about is 5.9 a page builder, it's even if you wanted it to be a page builder, it's not quite there. And I think there will be a time in WordPress where you can build a page with vanilla WordPress. Does that mean it is a page builder in the way we think about page builders today, like Beaver Builder and Elementor? No, because those are for-profit companies. That's all they spend their time on doing. They cover everything, and WordPress is never going to be designed for that. But it doesn't mean that it can't be a platform in which you can build a page with the help of other third-party plugins that you might do some niche things that you're looking for. So I like to think of this new approach of WordPress as empowering those who are not hardcore developers, who are more just general users or builders they want to build their own website. This functionality will facilitate that. It might not be there quite yet. Maybe we're looking towards 6.0 to get there. But I'm doing I have a meetup later tonight that I'm doing. It's all about block patterns. And I'm just, preparing for this. I'm like, okay, let me whip up a page. It's remarkable how quickly you can put together a well-designed looking page with no code, just dropping in content, and which you could just never do before. And that's why I think this whole thing is quite magical, but it is a big change. It's a big switch from where we were, year or 2 years ago. And I'll be the first one to say it. There's still bugs and hurdles that need to be overcome. But I'm very entrenched. So I'm heavily on the block page builder train, but that's kind of how I see it.
I'm so glad you're talking about patterns too, because that's I actually have a Gutenberg Times post I'm hoping to publish later today that talks about like the foundation that 5.9 sets. And one of the things is talking about how, like, how can we add patterns whenever you're creating a new template? How can we make those more contextual and more visible? So like if you're creating a brand new template, rather than just being greeted with this blank page, how could we have it so that you could easily drop patterns either through your theme or the pattern directory in the future? There's a cool, I'll quickly share my screen. There's a cool issue here that's talking about exactly that. So increasing the promise of contextual patterns when template editing. And I think this is one of those like refinement pieces that we haven't gotten to. And part of it is like the pattern directory isn't hooked up to the inserter. So, you know, some of these things aren't quite there yet. But it's really exciting when you start to put the pieces together. And I think that's what I always keep telling people with 5.9 and full siting in general is just what the power comes when you put all the pieces and you see what they can do together. And this is a great example of that, where it's like, okay, so rather than starting from scratch, you now have something to work with, which is pretty neat.
Right. And the thing is, in order for that experience to be magical and not frustrating, you know, there needs to be you need to have a solid base block theme that you're working with. You know, there's a lot of pieces that need to go into place for somebody who's brand new to step in and use it and feel comfortable and actually get excited about things.
Yeah.
So I actually feel like we are, you know, 5.9 needs to come out. We need to get the new 2022 theme. There's still pieces in place until this thing is much more accessible. And you know, as you know, everyone was saying, I mean, I think having this outreach program to kind of wade through some of the stuff is imperative. And it's just unfortunate, not anyone's fault, but it's unfortunate this stuff has taken so long. And, you know, but it's big. I mean, in making sure that WordPress is still backward compatible and everything still works is a challenge. So good things.
I know, yeah, it takes time. And I like to keep coming up with responsive controls. I hear that a lot too, where, you know, right now page builders offer way more in terms of responsiveness. And it's like, when is Core going to catch up with this? And like, there are certain aspects Core may never implement because it doesn't make sense to. And I think that's, it's very interesting. It's almost like we've forgotten the history of WordPress, where you always have used plugins to extend WordPress. Like this is always going to be the case. And instead everyone's like, well, full siting is going to do everything. And I'm like, no, like it'll do a lot. It sets the foundation, but there's still going to be room for lots of opportunities for extenders to both build businesses around these niches and to you know, help folks get what they need. So yeah, I'm curious what new opportunities pop up.
I don't mean to steamroll the conversation here, but one of the things that I find really interesting is that the new 2022 theme that's going to come out with 5.9, if you look at the style sheet for that theme, there's virtually nothing in it. The biggest component of it is a fix due to a lack of functionality that will eventually come to WordPress so they can remove that. If you look at any WordPress theme ever, huge style sheets, you know, doing all sorts of stuff. And so like, it's, you know, it's such a change in the way we think about themes and everything. And to your point about it opens new avenues for folks to build plugins, build extensions that do all sorts of new, interesting things within this new framework. That's very exciting. I just not that many people have jumped on that yet. You know, it's kind of like this unexplored space. So I think that, you know, once 5.9 comes out, the next 6 months to a year is going to be a very interesting time. Yeah.
Well, this is where like the plugin that you've been working on with WP Engine, the block Explorer plugin? I just referenced
block
it. Like, block pattern explorer.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah, like that kind of work where it's like, you know, paving the way, I think is really cool. Like I'm excited to see more of these kinds of solutions. I know Nick Hamsey was working on like a theme JSON, which I love the name of it's really funny. But it's a cool way to switch different styles. Like there's cool things that are popping up, but I think we're just at the very beginning of this about to take off, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
There's some goofy things, but like eventually what, like this plugin that Nick Hamsey has, eventually this is not going to be needed. Like eventually it'll be built into the interface. So there's also like these temporary solutions while we're on our way.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah.
like the idea of the block patterns being extremely purpose driven. So in my own life and work, I find that there are sites that are built purely for creative purposes, and I greatly value those sites, but I tend to work on sites that are trying to sell stuff or communicate something that have like a real like tangible purpose. And in my opinion, sometimes the worst thing that you can do when you're trying to achieve something or elicit a behavior out of your site visitor is to make it overly creative or choose a page layout that doesn't serve the actual purpose of what you're trying to achieve. So I love the idea that a theme builder could, with very low code, elicit that thought process out of the content creators for which they're building the store or the site, right? So if the theme pattern director leader is like, okay, start a page. What am I going to do with this page was the first question you were asking. And instead of like, how is it going to look? Isn't the question. The question is, what does it need to do?
Ooh, I think I agree with you right there.
So I feel like there's just so many directions that the block pattern directory can take to be effective in the vertical of the particular site that you're going to be building for. And so I think it's really useful for us to be thinking deeply about how to use the block pattern to elicit better content out of people who may not be professional content creators. Does that make sense?
Completely. It also, I mean, this comes up with site building too, right? Like imagine rather than trying to build a header from scratch, you're just slipping through patterns. And that's some of the stuff that's being worked on. And I think that to me is what's most exciting is it's like, you don't need, if you want to, you could get into customization if that's your jam, but patterns really do unlock this ability to, I heard someone describe it as like democratizing design for everyone. And I even had some designers at Automatic. I'm working on a fun side project and was using some patterns from the directory. And someone was like, Anne, did you do this yourself? And I was like, yeah, these are all patterns in the pattern directory. And they were like, oh, no wonder this looks so good. And I was like, yeah, this isn't me. Like, I just am reusing this stuff. It's making me look great. I think that's really exciting. And to have it be kind of, as you're saying, like contextual. So like, as you're about to do an action, to have it be immediate, like, hey, you want to use these things? You don't have to come up with it yourself. Harsh coworkers, honest, they were very like, and you're not a designer. Yeah, I'm very excited about that, especially with the template, creating new templates. I have been that is one thing that I've seen people stumble on time and time again with the outreach program, is it is really hard to start from scratch with a lot of that stuff. So the more we can streamline it, or even just like having like, I'm sure there could be a plugin, and I'm sure there already is, where you can integrate just templates into your site, regardless of theme, and just add them in and play around with different templates as you're creating new pages. I know WordPress.com has some flows with that.
I think that a lot of this is going to follow the theme developers. So
yeah,
because one of the things, so take the pattern directory, which is when 5.9 comes out, it's going to be this community-led effort for hundreds, thousands of patterns. That could be very overwhelming, especially like for a client. Like if you're an agency and you're delivering a full site editing theme to a client, enabling the pattern directory might not be the best course of action. So those things can be disabled, right? And so disabling that, but then what you can do is you can provide your client or customer, whatever, with a very clean, however you want to do it, collection of patterns. And you
A
can
subset that
and
meets
you
that.
can categorize them however you want, and provide like as you were saying, like very clear, like, and once you start integrating with things like WooCommerce, like different checkout page patterns and things that are like, you can really dial it in. So while patterns can go crazy, you can have thousands of patterns that can overwhelm a customer or a user, you are also able to really dial it down to just what you want to serve that person. So I think that's what's really cool. A lot of flexibility, but it also gives you the ability to really narrow things down. So
yeah, I mean, I write a plugin and a theme for an audience that creating a website is, or web page and making it look good is their worst nightmare, right? They don't want the creativity. They don't have time to think about it, and they don't know the answer even if they did. So it's my goal. The value add is this for this, like, this for this. You won't embarrass yourself. Go, and so I think that there's also a lot of opportunity for site builders and store builders and agencies that provide that level of service to do so at a higher margin with less time invested and less code to maintain. I mean, that's like really the punchline for me is like, okay, well, yeah, I did spend a gazillion hours. Now I can just whip up some patterns that Anne created and, get the same effect. So it's a real opportunity.
And I think that themes are going to be judged not only on their aesthetic, but on that collection of patterns, on what they're providing their users the ability to, with a single click in a curated space, add to the page, which I think is awesome. So
I was trying out the Brixie theme and then another theme that's not yet launched, so I won't share the name, but I will eventually share it in the outreach program. And the patterns, I mean, some of them just blew me away. I was like, oh, this is so cool. Like, to be able to have this customization, to be able to just like drop in, a grid of pricing tables that have a neat background shadow that I don't have to do any work on. I just like plug and play. It's so awesome. Like it feels, I keep spinning up new sites, which is really a problem. But yeah, I'm very, very excited about a lot of what you're describing. Rita, it seems like you want to share.
Oh, no, I was just thinking that language, this has been percolating in my head, that we really should try and work. I think everything that's being discussed is exactly where we need to kind of focus some of the going forward, especially into 6. And I think that's where everybody tends to have got their feet wet. So early adapters, and now it's like it's mainstream. And we're gonna, I already run into it. It's just how to address, language templates, because that word template has so many meanings depending on where you discuss that. And it's just that sometimes I think we need to think about what is a beginner track, what is an intermediate track, and what is an, like when you say extender, is that at a developer level. And finding language that people can actually have a conversation, that they're both talking the same thing, that like they're actually being able to express, I'm a beginner and I don't know how to use this template that is in this pattern, or I'm going to add it to my site. And that other people, because that's where I see this like I have to stop sometimes when I'm helping to make sure that I'm understanding what they're talking about when they use the word. And it's, I don't know if that's just about writing, or whether it's actually putting something, someplace where because like going to some of the learning channels like LinkedIn or anywhere else, that doesn't take place. Everything is just very directed. And I think that there's no onboarding in a way that people feel they have a set of, an idea, a track that says, okay, this is consistent for everybody. Now, where you decide to go with that in a way of what your interest is, you get to choose. But this is the onboarding that everybody gets. And whether that's in when we spin up a new site, it's there, and it just is a series of links to learn.wordpress.org or whatever. But that kind of stuff, or here's where you need to kind of familiarize yourself, and then you kind of let them do their own thing.
I mean, yeah, everything you're describing. Oh, Nick, sorry, please go. I have so many thoughts. I'm like, yes.
No, your comment about language is really important. So for my presentation tonight, what I did is I went to the WordPress plugin repository, and I just tried to find plugins that insert patterns, or what we would think of as patterns. Let me give you some names. Cloud Templates in Patterns Collection, Templates Cloud, Gutenberg Templates, Responsive Template Importer, Starter Templates. So that word templates, right, is incredibly confusing, because what these plugins are doing is they're actually inserting a collection of blocks, which we would consider patterns, which is different from a template. But in the broad ecosystem of WordPress, all these users are saying, oh, templates. And it's not connecting, right? Because what we're using in actual WordPress as a template is completely different from what the community is seeing. So it's a tough one. Language is important.
Well, it's also funny because I found a post internal from Automatic that I wrote, because I built a site like a year or so ago. I just did like a YouTube video on it actually. And I had this moment, I wanted to see exactly what I said. And I said, I found myself wanting to create a reusable template. Like literally that was a thought that popped in my head. And I was so alarmed. Like this was, when did I write this post? Yeah, this was over a year ago, where I was like, in 2020, November 2020, when things were before things had launched or anything like that. And it's one of those things where I'm writing a post right now, a support doc on the difference between reusable blocks, template parts, and patterns. When do you use which? What do they mean? What's synced, what's not? And like, how do we clarify, like, template parts should never be user content. And how do we explain that? What is user content? And I have had the hardest time trying to write this thing. Like I have been going back through the archives of things and like WordPress Slack of how people have described it. I've been trying to come across like different situationals. And so much of it is like, we're opening up all these options and there's a lot of nuance in what you can do, but there's also things that we do not want to encourage people to do.
Right.
And so how do we
you need a bridge between the old lingo and the new lingo?
Yeah.
Because when you say template to me, I think, oh, the template hierarchy. And of course, that's not what we're talking about at all.
Yep.
And it is never what a user meant. They think template like, go on Adobe Stock and find an InDesign template for a trifold brochure.
Yes.
And so I think that there's a lot of work we can do inside of the community to help those of us in terms of Kevin Bacon, like 1 degree of separation, 2 degrees of separation, 3 degrees of separation from the core team and how they're thinking about it. How do we all ensure that our language is consistent so that when we are sort of, if we constitute the message amplifiers of the WordPress community, we should all ensure that and take responsibility that we are using a descriptive, understandable, intuitive, and consistent language. Because if we use it consistently, it will be understood eventually by those folks who are many more degrees of separation away from writing the core code. So that's one way to think about the challenge. I also have been thinking about the challenge in terms of just taking a reality check for myself on how much differently I think than my captain on a boat, right? Because to your point, Rita, a template to him is like the whole page and it is already done. And for me, if he uses my headline, I'm offended. I'm like, no, that headline was there for you to know you're supposed to put a headline in. You can't use the headline, but he's of course going to use the headline because he never wanted to write a headline in his whole life. He's like, oh, that's a good headline. Buy a charter. What else am I going to say? So I think that there, as I was trying to like, oh, man, I'm going to help you with this really hard document. As if, right? Help me, help person over here. I was like trying to write away my own answer to that really hard question. And I was like, okay, well, actually, I think that we have to think about the ways we talk about when you can use this exact thing, and that's okay with me, or that's okay for you, and it's not going to embarrass you. Like, which theme was it, like 2015 or 2016 that had the vase with the cactus? You know the one I'm talking about on the
Yes, I think it's 2017.
Yeah, and it was the first full screen
right
image.
Do you know how many websites I visited that had that cactus vase?
Oh, it's the same. Yeah, it's the same. It's all the same.
It was like, Sally's hair salon, wherever had the cactus vase. Like everybody had the cactus vase because it was kind of hard to change. and to figure out how to change. And it was cool. So it
Mhm.
worked, you know, but like, how do we communicate that? Because to me, that's a key element of this language consolidation.
Yeah. I have another personal idiosyncrasy around pattern, because pattern to me, you know, it's very hard for me to think of pattern without dark, you know, pattern being the thing that means my father, when he was still alive, wanted a pocket knife and wound up signing up for the Knife of the Month Club for $50 a month.
Yep. Dark patterns. Totally.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it's very, are there any other like templates, simple parts? I know reusable blocks is a big one, like other big language things that you see coming up? Because I know tied to this too is like using language that describes things that are being edited globally versus like locally on the page. Like that's another big distinguishing thing that we don't have language around. That's like, yeah, it's a whole.
So with the meetup, sometimes when I get, because many of the people that attend my meetup, we're small, teeny, but they are of a different generation. So they're coming to this.
My generation.
Well, they're
I'm
coming to this.
61.
Well, no, you're dealing with people who are not by any means like completely novice. They've used a computer and they've used software in a very specific way. So this nuance of how to address building a website, because now all of a sudden this is new. They want to be online. They want to have a presence. They've started a small side hustle, and we are using language. And what I see is this huge frustration at how to explain what they want, because they also are at a place where they're uncomfortable with the fact that they don't know how, like they're used to having control over their workflow, and now they don't. And they don't even know how to ask a question. And that is really because there is a disconnect in how we address language and what we call different things. And I think Meg is spot on about what has been a big issue all along, because there's this whole idea, like for many of us who have used WordPress in a sense using classically themes and the entire spin up from that, we are well aware of some of these language shifts or meaning to certain vocabulary. But for new people, whether they're young or old, they are all coming to this with a completely different set of understanding. And there is nowhere you can point them to that says, okay, this is what you need to kind of wrap your head around, and then maybe come back and we can have that discussion. We don't do that. It's just there. And when I see the disconnect between developers and clients, even in agency setups, it's always around that communication of vocabulary. People do not have a consistent verbiage that they can relate to, because when if we completely separate who are the developers and core developers, or what I call the builders of WordPress, you just watch them make meeting. I mean, just the conversations in Slack. If you had no idea, like I'll sit in just because I learn about different words and I can go look it up and I can then share that. But there are things that are being discussed there. So it is extremely intimidating. And I think that I've watched just to see if there's a kind of a demographic difference where you have younger people who are used to technology and just moving around versus people who are used to using their technology for a specific reason. So it's usually business versus just text messages and Instagram. And I watch to see how that actually works. And I think we have it on both ends. I don't think language, their language, our language, what is WordPress language is really in need of a better, I think you would have done 10 times better with Gutenberg. Unless you were a graphic designer, you would never have known who Gutenberg was or why it was chosen, that significance and history. And, that finally was explained, but you know, there's other things that we've done. And I think this is where we throw things out there in a way that we assume people have that insight. And unfortunately, it's that old problem, communication and, you know, consistent words.
It's tricky though, because like, as you're talking, what comes to mind for me is eventually the UI should make it so that language isn't such a lever for someone to understand. Like kind of like we're talking about with, like, let me think of an example, like the query loop block. For a while, you could actually edit the title of a post within the query loop block, and they eventually disabled that ability because it was not clear in the UI. So now if you're using the query loop block, you're not accidentally updating your post titles because we realized this isn't clear. We need to shut this down. So it's like, how can we have the interface so that someone's not saying, I need to add a template part here. Instead, they're only being shown header template parts and they can select from them. And they're not even thinking about the conceptualization of the language, or this needs to be site structure or like whatever. Like, I think there needs to be some nudging around like global versus local, but that's way easier to understand, where it's like, this will update everywhere versus like, this just changes here. And I think that's like, as we're talking about language, I'm like, it is going to be such a failure if language matters too much. And I do also think that one of the beautiful things with full site that makes me really excited is that eventually we're all going to be talking about the same things. These concepts are going to be across, whether you're writing a post, you're creating a page, whatever, like all of this will be the same. And so we can kind of steadily improve the experience of everything once there's consistency everywhere. And like this language in theory right now, I think it matters a lot. There's a reason I'm writing that support doc. I'm probably going to do a YouTube video on it. But I also think in time, hopefully, because like, to be honest, the younger generation doesn't want to know about this stuff either. I make friends do stuff. They don't want, they're like, what? I don't want to know about this. Like, it's like knowing the names of an Instagram filter. They don't care. They're just sliding through. And
no, I
I'm
agree
like,
with you there.
Myself.
No, I agree with you there. It's just what happens is the people that show up to the meetup are there because they have a real, they're running into an issue. And what I want to be able to do is point them, either provide them with a you know, we use the word support. There are some things I can help them with, and some things they have to take that step themselves. So you kind of learn that over a period of time where it's like, do this for me for free, or they're really struggling. And so what I try to do is get them comfortable in the community by going to WordPress.org, going to the docs, learning how to look, because they don't know how to do that. Like they have no clue that this is where I'm like, have you read through? No. And it's, you know, it's trying to get people to feel that comfort. And I think it's, when I use the term onboarding, technology tends to assume a certain degree of knowledge. And I think that we all do that. And I'm in so many different communities, and it's now become almost like a fascination for me to see how they onboard you. And I watch to see where I'm being led to specific documents to pay attention to. So, I mean, when we spin up a new version of WordPress, there's always the intro that from the admin side that you get. And I think that in that section, it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a widget that just basically onboards you, like go here to get a sense, and it's just links, and it then take like how far they want to explore, they can make that choice. But there's some consistency there in how, like, as soon as you have your post, please, I would love it, because I will be sharing that. And it's just helpful, because then when I'm there and we're talking, or I have a question, we can refer to something that puts us both on the same page.
And this also goes into how much of this is the hosting's job versus a plugin versus core, right? Like, because some of this is like the managed hosting experience, like managed WordPress experience, like that is more of where those like hyper onboarding flows. This is what this is where you learn. But then also what does Learn WordPress play? Like, how can we shove people in that direction, regardless of how they get started? You know?
I don't think you need, I am hesitant to sign off on hosting, because they drive me crazy, because I mean, hosting is about there to make money. So everything is an a la carte. What I'm getting at is, if we post something if they are not managed hosting and they are using some, like they're in WordPress.org, and we spin up, here's the new stuff. And by the way, if you want to kind of familiarize yourself with some new words, some new vocabulary, some areas to pay attention to, here's a couple of links. I know that people do that. And I certainly, like, I will direct people, like, what did you read, to get them used to reading a changelog, to get to, because they're learning the hard way. It's not that I'm saying it's CORE's job to do that.
Yeah. But we need
It
to have
is
the
their
support
job to
documentation
go
stuff.
and get educated. But if we don't show them, I call them wayfinders. If you do not provide wayfinders that are simple until they decide to go down whatever rabbit hole, you are going to lose people. And we have
a couple with like, I know I wrote a doc for styles and for the site editor, because there is a like onboarding flow that pops up when someone enters the experience.
Yes.
But even that, it's like, when I was writing those docs, I feel like I could write a PhD thesis on like, how to use the site. So it's like, how do we give just enough information without overwhelming, without turning someone completely off from it? But yeah, and also even that onboarding pop-up isn't,
it's better than what's not there. And that's, I mean, that's what I'm getting at. Like there is a piece that becomes that end user, that's on them to decide how to go. But I just think if we just call it Wayfinder or something where people can just say, okay, here's some consistent verbiage, and take them outside of their site, take them into core or into the documentation section or on themes. Like if you just click on theme, here is the theme repository. These are the things you need to pay attention to. Now that may be for documentation, I don't know, but these are just
some of the stuff. I'll like share what I'm describing. I'm a very visual person, so just because there's a recording, I'm like, oh, I can show this. So like one of this is the welcome guides, so you can kind of scroll through and see these. And then there's also one for styles. I think I undid it, but it like kind of loosely walks you through. But I agree, this is the kind of stuff that we probably need more of, and also to find even the access to that. Like this is the support doc. I think one of the things that's frustrating is it only pops up the first time you open it, and maybe you want to find it more often. So like, how do we surface that for people? But this is basically as far as it goes in terms of actually, and then I think of course you can click help here, and I'm pretty sure this goes to, this was the site editor doc.
I had two thoughts that I wanted to
add.
I hope they add value, but one is that I just want to underline and highlight what Anne said about intuitiveness and user experience. I mean, that's the holy grail, right? And I think that the younger the audience right now, the more the expectation is intuitiveness. And if it's not intuitive, they bounce. Like that's just flat out. Like, under a certain age, they've lived their life in a technology of intuitive UX. And if it's not, they're not going there. That's the first observation I had. And I just want to kind of focus the conversation on that, because I would love to think that we're ever approaching that day. Sooner and sooner and sooner, right? When I first used WordPress, I would be honest and to say that intuitive is not a word I would use to describe.
Yes.
Today, though, we're getting closer and closer to that sort of holy grail of goals. And I think that the other underline that I wanted to make to something that Anne said is just, as we keep that as our goal in our mind, and we remember that we are early adopters. The least early of all of us is still an early adopter. And sorry. And, and it is the early adopters who need these language tools, because once the early adopters do the role that they take, the intuitiveness takes a giant leap forward, and the language tools are less necessary. So we're feeling the pain of it, but it's going to be less. And that's just to reinforce what Anne said, and to try and just refocus. Like, what things have you tested that weren't intuitive?
Yeah, I love the idea. Also, I love the child. Kids' voices are so fun. I'm like not around kids enough.
Especially
Oh,
about a
hi.
pickle. Are you having fun things with pickles?
So cute. See you, Mary.
Yeah,
I think it
Oh.
was official that she was credited on 5.6 in the release. Like, I think she's the
Aw.
youngest contributor officially. Like, I don't know
Yes,
if it
yes,
was
yes.
official or just in the marketing team, but at least
Aw.
within our team, she got credited and she was like 6 months old. So
That's lovely.
I love the idea of early adopters needing the language though, because I think you're so right about that, where it's like, how do we ensure the messaging gets across? Like, even I've seen some folks who've made block themes. They're like, this is a full sighting theme. This is a block theme. This is a theme built for blocks. It's like all these different terms. And it's like, ugh, every time I see it, I want to be like, use this, but it's like, I don't really know if that's right either. Like, we're calling them block themes in documentation. But yeah, I think it would be really neat to do a call for testing around like these exact sort of things, like approach the site editor. Where do you get dropped off? Like actually just hitting points where either we need to like add nudges or whatever. I think that could be a neat lens through which to look at the experience. Nick, what are you? I feel like
I have a really fun one because you're talking
Yeah.
about, so like this is the editor's one that I've been really hung up on, right? Because, well, a lot of people just call it Gutenberg, which is incorrect.
I agree.
But you have, I've gotten to a point where I'm like, okay, editor, edit post pages, and then site editor, because it's a differentiator between when you're editing the whole site. But then the link in the nav says editor. And I'm like, ugh. Like, I get it. It's just the editor, but I do think like it's confusing because I'm going to run into this in 2 hours where I'm going to be talking about the editor and people aren't going to know what I'm talking about.
Yes,
so I'm
yeah.
going to differentiate saying editor and site editor, but
well, there's a site editor, there's
editor
template
button for the site
editor.
editor.
Yes, yeah.
You
And it's
aren't
funny 'cause, like-
confusing
Mhm.
site. Top line, it says edit site for one thing and edit site for another. One is the site editor and the other one is editing the multi-site site.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Oh
So-
yeah.
I'm always hitting the wrong one.
Because do they both say edit site, or what does it say? Is it like my sites versus edit sites? Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's edit site.
I think that's what it is. That's a good, I'm gonna add that. That's next thing to follow up on. Yeah, I've
I
gotten
think for me,
documentation's really bad too, with like template editing, site editor, page editor. Like it's like, and I know eventually it's like, it'll be the WordPress editor. Like eventually that's, you can do everything in one place, but we're not there. But yeah, Meg, sorry.
sorry, I interrupted you, but
Mhm.
I was just going to point out that my captains actually see no difference between the site and the page and there is no difference. So the word site editor is confusing. I am married to my pilot testing captain, and we've had this conversation 5 times today. And I'm like, he's like, what do you mean? I'm editing the site. I'm like, no, you're making a page. He's like, so but the point is that he
Language doesn't
shouldn't
matter,
be an
yeah.
early adopter.
Mhm.
He's only an
Mhm.
early adopter because he's married to me. You know what I mean? So like he needs to stay far away from the new technology and stay in a proven lane. But that's why I think it's really important to keep just reminding ourselves that the language is only for those of us who need the language, and it will evolve out of we hope that the tool itself will prove the obsolescence of the need for the language for the tool.
Right.
Yeah. This is reminding me that I want to update or at least make sure the glossary is up to date. I think there were some recent styles related stuff added in, but that's something like with the outreach program, like as things come up where it's like, and we really need a definition on this, like I'm happy to, round everyone up, talk about in core editor, like figure something out where we can kind of get some consensus. Because I know it's also come up documentation with marketing efforts, even with like videos I've done. But yeah, getting these refined. Like for example, this says block template parts in here, but I'm pretty sure we're just going with template parts.
Even block patterns should just be patterns, right? There's no
Yep.
other such thing as other than block patterns. So you just,
And I am inconsistent with that. I will admit that is
Oh,
one thing that I am wildly, I will sometimes say the block editor, I'll sometimes say the editor, like it's very, very tricky.
it's hard.
Yeah.
It depends if
Although,
if you're searching for patterns and you type in block patterns, then you might find something to do with WordPress. If you're searching for patterns and you just type in patterns, you might find something to do with knitting or sewing.
Yeah, quilting.
I think
that
that
was
came
the
up with,
one thing that I was going to say when we were talking about the word patterns and things it brings up. Like, I'm a garment maker, like I immediately think of a pattern. The second thing I was going to say is the beautiful thing about block is that it brings to mind Legos, which do the exact same thing that we're trying to get. It's the word picture. So it is kind of good to throw block in front of anything that we're trying to communicate has a nesting behavior. So that was the one thing. And then the other thing is language around parent-child. So in that same document that you were working on, is there's this whole idea of like, okay, well, yes, you could make the child the parent and the parent the child, but when should you, and when should you not do that? It does have the capability, but so there is, there's value to which one of these things is the bigger nesting doll, so.
Which is so hard to explain. Like that stuff is a whole other, but that's also where eventually, if you're just inserting a pattern, you will not need to know that you are using a group block as a container. Like it doesn't matter. It's cool. Like unless you need to make some deep customizations, then you can go digging. But I think that's where it's like, I keep going back to like eventually a lot of this stuff hopefully won't matter, but the search engine stuff, like what you actually SEO, like that stuff really matters. Like I know that's come up with various naming things where it's like, well, we can't name it that because that is aligned with this, and like or even full site editing. I've been like very hesitant around how do we make sure full site editing isn't seen as something that's on or off, because it is a collection of features. How do we communicate that aspect when we're using one term? And I have obviously not figured this out, and obviously did not catch on because we still talk about full site editing. Or like, I mean, to be honest, even with the outreach program, it's like, it still is labeled as an experiment in Slack. When am I going to update that? I don't know. How long is this going to be an FSE Outreach experiment? Who knows? I've used it so many places that at this point, it's kind of like we're stuck with it. So it impacts everything. Yeah, it's very, very,
I
very
used
tricky.
that WP 101 for a client, but I had watched the video. They update pretty, Sean, who runs, or it's his company. I think they're out of Texas. He updates that as I mean, he keeps it up to date. And a lot of the hosting companies will have that as their kind of go-to resource for starting out again. And the problem is in some cases that becomes an added feature cost to learning about some of this. And where I'm going with this is what ends up happening is you get pushback. Well, WordPress isn't showing us how to do this. And I'm like, it's not WordPress's, that is, the assumption is always falling back on what WordPress is not doing. And I mean, I see this as a reflection of just a lot of things. And it's like trying to educate people. There are several sources in between what you're doing and where WordPress is, and what WordPress has done to support you versus what is happening in between. If they start using Elementor and they haven't read Elementor docs, and then they start trying, so it's all, but then the support mechanism that comes in from either of these other resources will say, oh, that's a WordPress issue. And they use language in their support that is not consistent with what is WordPress. So those kind of disconnects are not going to be solved overnight. And they certainly are not something that I think will have, like the idea of Lego. Lego works if you are familiar with Lego. But when Meg said nested, I was like, okay, I think everybody gets the idea of nested. So, it's just, for me, it's wayfinders. I grew up without English being my first language. So everywhere I go, I don't ever navigate by telling people, like I find in America, everybody has to give you either an acronym or they give you like you're sitting there with an actual GPS unit because you go to this corner. I don't. I look at what is a visual that I can, whether it's in English or any other language, I know exactly where to point somebody, say there's a gas station or a Shell gas station, or there's something that's there that people will recognize, and you go left. And what I'm getting at is that's the kind of thing we need. And so if you're saying a user interface, that user interface is going to have the ability to cross culture. And I don't know if we can do that right away. And I just think this is where having a bank of consistent verbiage and say, this is it. And if you have a difficulty with that, then reach out and we'll try and find a way to support that, individually, and not having to spend time trying to answer every nuance to the word template.
Well, I do think I'm going to show two different issues that touch on what you're describing. It's like, and what I've been talking about the user interface. So one is like, what if we colorized things? So if you're editing something that's global, what if it was there was visually like something that you saw, right? So I won't go into deep. I think it's just very brief here, but it's like, imagine if that were the case. Idea. Yeah, so that's like one, right? So it's like, how can this be where we don't even need to have a language? And then there's work being done around locking. So like, imagine like the options are just taken away, or you have this little lock icon, or you literally can't drag this around. Like, how can we make it so that the options are limited? You can visually see it. It's like, you literally just can't do it. And maybe that's frustrating, but at least it's not all of a sudden I have to figure out how to do whatever. It's like, oh, here are my options. This is what I can do. And how do we communicate that? So like, maybe we add it into the list view, for example. So everything you're describing, it's like, we could make this part of the interface where we're guiding people towards interactions. And I think one of the things right now at 5.9 is that we're obviously not there. Like, this is where it is, like, we are on the edge. And as a result, I think there is such a discussion around language. And I cannot wait until we get into a place where I don't need to, if I'm writing a call for testing, we don't need to get into the hyper specifics of like what to add and where to add it and all that sort of stuff. Before we go too far, I actually have a call at the hour with my team leader, else I could keep going. I don't think she'd appreciate if I blow off that meeting. I wanted to wrap up just to say thank you. This was like a really good conversation and really insightful. And I really encourage you all as like stuff comes up with language to flag things. I do often have time to create resources, update current ones, and kind of keep things moving. And I know we talk a lot about like product feedback, but this very much is in line with it. So if there's something with the UI or issues that I brought up that you want to chime in on or share feedback, like this is all important and something that I know everyone's thinking about and working on. So big thank you. And I'll say I am trying to work on, I'll give you all sneak peeks since you all joined. I'm working on a next call for testing so that we can get started as soon as 5.9 is out. Rather than doing something that's so like 5.9 focused, I think I'm going to go in a more future thinking direction and touch on media in the full site editor. So everything from cropping things to the duotone controls to what if I want the featured image as a cover block behind my post title. Like, how do you set these things up? What is the experience like? How does media fit into the experience of full siting and building a site? Because we all know having great visuals is a huge part of having a beautiful site. So expect that coming up, and expect it to be kind of similar to the block theme switching thing we did before, where it's part exploration, part feedback. So I think we're going to have like a couple prototypes to go through, ability to paste into the image block, yes, like all sorts of things, like what do you want? So a couple prototypes, a couple situational, so tasks, things you want to run into, and then kind of an open-ended, give me all your feature requests, like let's get it all out in the open. So I hope it'll be kind of a fun break. I know I've been like so it's not 5.9, but I think it would be kind of fun to like leap ahead. So expect that soon after 5.9. Yeah, otherwise, thank you so much for joining. I will record and post this on make.wordpress.org/test. And if you're watching this, thanks for watching. Otherwise, I'm going to end the recording. We can all wave.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Have a
Bye.
great